You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hello, welcome back to the show, episode 277. Adrian hosting, Renaud joins me. Hi, Renaud.
Hey, Adrian. So, what is the topic today?
Well, we're talking about IP protection. This isn't the first time we've covered this topic, but it's a very important topic for many people who are getting products developed and manufactured abroad, not always only in China, anywhere. Of course, we're concerned about products IP, right? And in particular focus today, we're talking about sourcing components while still protecting IP, because if you think about it, when you're speaking to different suppliers to get components for your product, maybe they're going to find out some information about your product. Maybe they need to know some information about your product. But if they know too much or if they know the wrong thing, this could be a threat to your IP. So in very, very short, that's kind of what we're talking about today, about the risk of sharing, I suppose. So hopefully this is something that people are thinking, oh yeah, actually, I am sourcing and yeah, this is a concern. So we'll try to address these concerns.
Yeah, definitely. That's a topic that comes back on the table here and there. I've come across a lot of companies, a lot of people who are afraid, specifically when they have an innovative product, right? And they say, well, if I build it domestically, for example, in the US or the UK, or my unit cost will be much higher. And, how to say, I might not be very competitive on the market. I might not have a lot of cash to plow in to get the marketing and sales going, etc., etc. So it's very attractive to get it developed and made in China. Also,
Sure.
I get to the market much faster. But how can I protect it? I'm going to be ripped off. Basically, that's what people are afraid of, because they have heard of a lot of disasters, a lot of horror stories, but they haven't really got to the bottom of it. They don't really know. They haven't really analyzed it. They don't really know where the risks, where they're lying, and how to minimize the risks, right? So, yeah, interesting topic.
So we've talked about the risk, right? So sharing too much information could result in, getting copied, basically. And that's something we absolutely don't want. And it doesn't need to be inevitable. Let's start off, though, because we're talking about sourcing, right? Why is sourcing potentially such a sort of leaky ship?
So, again, if you buy a standard off-the-shelf kind of product, you're not worried about your intellectual property leaking, because there's basically no intellectual property. If you want to buy salt and pepper sets, that are already existing, and I don't know, you fly to Guangzhou, you go to Canton Fair, you find some suppliers that have the right products. Well, it's not your intellectual property, right? And maybe you tell, put my logo on this, make it in that shade of gray or beige or whatever, and this is my packaging. And what's your intellectual property here? Really not so much. Now, you might have a proprietary sales channel and access to certain buyers that the Chinese company might not have access to. So right there is actually part of, I'm not sure it really qualifies as intellectual property, but some proprietary information that you have and your own sales channels, and you don't want the supplier to know necessarily, who your customers are, how to contact them, what's the price that you sell your products to your customers at, these kind of things. But it's still very basic, right? If they circumvent you, if they go around you, they go to your customers. Maybe your customers are not interested for a number of reasons. And, well, maybe you just, by the time that happens, maybe you your portfolio of product has increased a lot. And, usually people who do these kind of things try to have a few steps of advance over Chinese companies, right? So that's kind of the game in general. Okay. Now, if you have thought of a product that is better than the products already on the market, and I mean better at something specific, right? A certain application, for fulfilling a certain need of a certain group of potential customers. Okay. You have come up with a better concept, a better idea, but that is your intellectual property. Now, an idea in itself is not worth much. It's only worth something if there's good execution, right? So at the very beginning, I would say ideas are, a dime a dozen. It really depends on how you execute. But if you spend a lot of time refining a really nice design for your product, you pick the key components and materials, you do CAD drawings, etc., etc. Okay, you get some prototypes, you refine it, you get some user feedback, you refine, and you test again some new prototypes, etc. You are really building your intellectual property, and if somebody copies that, well, that really hurts, right? And I think that's what we're going to talk about today. Is well, how to protect yourself. And I think that the theme of today's show is how do you protect yourself from your suppliers, right? Because a lot of the times, and a lot of the horror stories that people hear is like, well, I worked with a company and then they stabbed me in the back, right? They took the information and they made use of it without me in the picture, basically, right? And it's easy for them because they have a lot of information that I had to share with them to get them working on my project, to get them to make my products, right? That is really scary because you're actually funding a company and giving them the idea and execution and the design and everything on a golden platter or a silver platter, right? That's what you say. And you pay them, something actually to get to learn how to make that product. And then they use all of that to go after you on your market to compete with you, maybe to sell directly to your customers and so on. So that's what people are really afraid of.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the nightmare scenario.
Yeah. And there have been a lot of cases like that, obviously. So it's worth mentioning. But I think as a preamble, hey, it's not just China. Okay, because this always comes up like, oh yeah, in China, blah, blah. Oh, in China, they do that. Oh, you work with a Chinese company, they do that. Okay, well, yes, no doubt. There's a lot of companies, if you take Shenzhen alone, there's a lot of companies that are happy to play that game. But what is the proportion of these companies, versus the whole ecosystem of Chinese manufacturing companies and trading companies and so on in Shenzhen and in the broader area? It's actually not that high. Okay, so it's not like all the Chinese companies are out to get your to steal your ideas and your designs and compete with you, right? No. That's really, I think, the first thing to say. There's plenty of examples outside of the USA of companies that played this game, right? Oh, I learned a lot of things, and then I take what I learned and then I use it to become your competitor. I mean, Sharp did it against Apple when they worked on the Apple Newton, and then they came up with their own personal digital assistant. Okay, and that's something I think I mentioned that anecdote in the last episode based on the book Apple in China, but it's just like the latest anecdote that I read about that. So there's plenty of others, right? You look at the way Pegasus and Asus, okay, same group, same thing, basically learn how to make personal computers for Dell and HP and the others. And then over time, well, you keep subcontracting more and more to me. Okay. And then I even learned how to design personal computers. Well, now I have my brand and I'm starting to sell directly to consumers on your market, right? How do the people at Dell feel about that? Well, dude, one more competitor, right? And should we keep working with them for manufacturing? Because then they also know our roadmap, right? At one point, they get to make some choices. So it's not just Chinese companies. Okay, so that was just an aside first.
No, you're absolutely right. Okay, so the protection is important here. What sort of strategies can you share that can give us the confidence to go into sourcing without maybe giving away the farm?
I think first people need to understand bad things happen in certain types of situations. Okay. If you want to develop a new product, you go to, I don't know, give me an example of a product, maybe an electronic product.
Yeah, a blender.
Okay, a blender. Good. Okay. We have never worked on blenders, I think. Not on its own. Integrated.
No.
Anyway, in some like similar product, but never a blender per se. Okay, good. So if you say, well, I want to make it like fast, easy, I don't want to reinvent everything. I'm going to work with a company that already makes a lot of blenders. And then I'm going to be able to piggyback on their experience and so on. Totally legitimate, And you go to a company and then you say, well, my blender will have this function like this, and it will look like that. But how can we make it, based on some of your existing design and so on? So maybe the internals will be based on something already existing. And okay, well, in that case, if your product idea is great, what might happen, and we've seen that a number of times, what might happen is that the company will say, oh, okay, very good idea. Oh, let us work on that. Oh, and here's a prototype. What do you think? And then you give them feedback and you refine, they refine it and they refine it. And maybe they're very happy to do that kind of R&D. Maybe they don't even charge you anything. Maybe they charge you something to make sure you're kind of serious. Okay. Even better for them. But sometimes they don't charge anything. And then it never goes into production. It's like, oh, things really slowed down. And oh, yeah, we'll work on that. As things really, really slow down. And then a few months later, you see, oh, something really like, that's really what I was talking to them about, comes up somewhere on the market. Now, can you trace it directly to that company? Maybe not. Because remember, they're specialized in blenders. So they have a lot of customers already buying blenders from them, right? So they have all the distribution channels already. So it comes out in the USA under that brand, and then in Germany under that other brand, and then in Australia under that other brand, So basically what happened is that they made prototypes and then they showed it to some of their good customers, and then some of their good customers said, this is pretty interesting. Yeah, is it your product? Yeah. Yeah, it's based on this other existing product, and then we added this and da. That's a really good idea. Let me try. And then, oh, we like it. Yeah, we're going to send you a purchase order, 5,000 pieces, go. So for the manufacturer, it's much easier to go with an existing customer that you please because you brought them a solution. And they start right away with a bigger order. And it's not a startup that might go out of business in 6 months. No, it's an established company, and then their orders will keep growing. Of course, economically speaking, that's a much better proposition for them, right? So, but you put yourself in the situation where the manufacturer had every incentive to mess with you, right? You put yourself in that situation, right? So the strategy for that is like relatively obvious. If you really have an idea for a great new product, you better be really, really careful if you work with an ODM kind of manufacturer, right? So here, people usually call that original design manufacturer, ODM. Like, a company that tells you, yeah, okay, it's like we can modify one of our products. Because number one, you will never own the full intellectual property because it's based in large part on their existing intellectual property, or maybe that of their other customers or whoever, you don't even know, right? But it's not yours. And number two, they have the sales channels. If it's really a good product, nicely executed, and you give them a lot of feedback on how to make the prototypes better, well, some other companies targeting the same market as you will find it quite interesting, right? Right there, that be very careful when you do that, right? So either you don't open up and give the whole farm away, and maybe you take an existing product, you make some small tweaks, and then you start to sell it and make your own, set up your distribution channel, set up, I don't know, on Shopify, Amazon, or through your own, I don't know, brick and mortar retailers and so on. And then when you really want to go for the great product, then you design it from scratch with a manufacturer that is not specialized in blenders, right? They will just contract manufacture. You sign the proper contracts with them, and they will just make it for you, and that's it. And they will have much less, temptation to do something that is not in your interest. Okay, so this one is pretty, let's say, straightforward. Okay, now some other situations where you need to disclose information to your suppliers and say, okay, the product is going to be like this. So, your part has to fit within that other part. Otherwise, we cannot use it as defective, right? So you need to explain certain things to suppliers, and sometimes even some of the component suppliers. And then usually they don't even think of, okay, what is it? Should we, copy the product and so on? If it's a new product, usually they don't care. Again, if they are not deeply specialized in that kind of product for your market. But then once you start to buy more and more, let's say regular in relatively high volumes, they start to buy 2,000 a month, then 5,000, then 10,000. Then people start to be, curious. Hey, what's that? What kind of product? What kind of market? Like, there's probably a lot of money in there, right? How do I learn more about that? And we've actually caught a few years ago, I think it was just before COVID hit, maybe 2019, we noticed one of the component suppliers was trying to get into our factory and ask some questions to some of our people. And we're like, but what are you doing here? And basically the guy was curious, hey, they buy batches of 10,000, but I don't know what the final product is. And yeah, I'm curious. I'd like to know what kind of product it is, but what, what's that your business, go back to your place, bye-bye. And we have a problem with this guy. We probably need to change. Okay. So that's where, some smart entrepreneurial companies, let's say, will say, okay, there's a nice stream of business here. Let's try to understand it better to see if we can position ourselves to benefit from it, to benefit more from it. Maybe they make a part and they get whatever, $2 for that part, but they're thinking, hey, maybe the entire product is worth whatever, $10, and maybe they're selling it for 20 already here. Maybe there's a lot of money to be made here, right? And the volumes keep growing, so that's a really good, probably a really interesting business. I want to know what it is, and I want to see if maybe, once I see the entire product, then on my own, I can go and find the other component suppliers needed to make the whole. Maybe it's actually quite simple. And then I can start to, I don't know, make some prototypes and find some customers, show it on Alibaba, show it on the Canton Fair, and then get some business and become rich, right? So that is something that happens. Again, once you are starting to move thousands and thousands of products every month, right? This is not when you say, hey, this is my new product idea, that usually people don't really care about that. Okay. I'm just trying to say, like, put the finger where the main risks are. So what do you do in that case, right? How do you avoid giving the farm away, giving too much information, right? So a lot of people have this kind of idealistic picture in their mind of, buying the components from a bunch of suppliers that have zero idea what it is. Now, it is possible. Of course, it's possible. It's been done many, many times, but it's not always realistic. And maybe I need to explain why. Maybe, first, before we kind of explain how it would work, the suppliers need to understand what are your requirements if it's a custom product specifically. Hey, I want that, whatever, that hinge to have that force to open, and then I need it to be able to withstand that kind of stress, etc. Like, what are you trying to do, right? If you don't tell them and you just tell them the engineering specifications and so on, well, there's two issues. First, they might think, what are they trying to do? I'm not sure. Maybe I don't think this is really serious. I can't picture any product that would benefit from that. So it's probably a very niche application, probably very low volume. They're kind of a pain to deal with. Like, forget it. Like, I stopped working with that. Okay. That's number one. And then the second one is that they might work, again, for a custom design part, right? They might give you something that fulfills the requirements that you specified, but not all the requirements. And this happens actually more often than we would like. I remember, maybe 10 years ago, one of our clients had some issues. They were buying headphones from a company in Shenzhen. And there was like a rattling sound after a while when people were wearing the headphones. Some of the parts were becoming detached. So, okay, hey, got a problem with the glue, it seems, got a problem somewhere, go have a look. Okay. And then, okay, the glue. Well, let's talk with the glue supplier. Have you talked to the glue supplier? And the people at the factory were like, no, like, glue is a glue. Like, what's the problem? Well, call the guys. Okay. And then the glue supplier, the salesperson comes in, and then we show them the product. Hey, we have a problem here. And then the guy like, oh, what are you doing here? Our glue is not supposed to be, with wood, supposed to be plastic to plastic, but here you're doing plastic to wood. Like, this is never gonna work. This is the wrong kind of glue, right? Why are you doing that? And I was like, dude, right, okay. Maybe we should have told more to these guys, right? Instead of just buying glue, right? So this is an example, but there's so many other examples. Sometimes, and it also happens with standard off the shelf products, right? Like that glue, for example, or with some other components. I mean, the case just came up not so long ago, where we receive a component standard off the shelf, and then we see some deformations, little deformation. And then we tell the supplier, hey, that's a problem. And the supplier is like, huh? Why is that a problem? Usually this has no impact on function or anything. And we're like, yeah, but it has an issue with, the way we assemble it with the rest of the product. And the supplier is like, well, you don't tell me your standard. You don't tell me your requirements. Like, don't complain after that, That's it. I don't care. To me, it's perfectly acceptable. You never told me about your requirements. Oh, okay. So that's the very typical kind of issue where if you don't want the supplier to know, well, you better be really, really good at specifying what exactly you want and also what exactly you don't want. But the problem is that even if you spend whatever 200 hours thinking of all the potential issues and all of the components you buy for a product, you will never think of everything potentially wrong, right? So you're exposing yourself to this kind of issue anyway, right? Because like a blender might have 60 parts on the bottom or 100 parts on the bottom, right? So when you have 100 parts, okay, maybe let's say 60 parts. For every one of them, you're going to have to think of potential issues and so on and so forth. Even if you remove the screws and these kind of little components that usually have no issue, you're still left with exposed to possibility of a lot of these issues, right? So that's sort of the caveat. If you don't give any information to your suppliers, you got to be pretty careful, and you are exposing yourself to issues. Okay. Now, can you show them just a part of the product? Yeah. Can you tell them your part is going to be assembled with that other part and is going to create that sub-assembly, right? And we just show you a part of it, and we don't tell you if it's a blender for a kitchen or, for industrial use or what kind of things you will blend. But you see that these are, obviously blades that will cut through something. It looks like a blender, right? But you don't know the final look of the blender or things like that, right? So in many cases, you can do that, but it's not always realistic. Okay. That's one thing. And another thing also I would add to debunk this ideal picture, right, of keeping all the suppliers in the dark is when you start to have problems, you know, do you have the engineering capabilities to go and troubleshoot right away on your own with your own team? Or will you have to rely on the supplier? Okay. So if you're a big company and you have a big team of engineers right here close to the supplier with all the disciplines you need, then it's easier to play that game. But if you're managing a supplier and your company is 5 people in Canada and you're trying to manage a Chinese supply chain from a distance, you know, how long can you wait for troubleshooting to be done, right? Or are you going to give some information? Like, are you going to give a part of the firmware to the PCB assembly supplier so they do some of the troubleshooting, or maybe on the test jigs or something, right? And there's many, many examples like that, many cases where you don't want to rely on the supplier for troubleshooting. Okay, well, do you have an alternative? And sometimes the answer is no. Maybe you buy some highly specialized kind of components. Well, then you might have to rely on the specialized expertise of the supplier, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's kind of like I think the advice you've given is very helpful in terms of approaching it carefully. I mean, you spoke about specialized suppliers kind of at the start, right, with regards to blenders. But if we look at hardware startups, for example, with innovative products, sometimes they do need help from people who specialize. So it's good to hear that you can still deal with people who specialize, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to rip you off.
No, right. Of course not. Of course not. And so basically what I explained is that is not always that straightforward and it's not always realistic. But yeah, a lot of companies have done that. And obviously, I mean, we have a lot of examples in our company of projects where it's the case. But yeah, it can slow things down a little bit because the suppliers have no idea what the product is, so they might not be as excited and fast. They might not prioritize the project as well as highly, and it does take a bit of extra work to specify things further. In some cases, we have to actually take a drawing and like make some changes to it, so people have really cannot guess what the application is, what the final product is. But then, in a way that it's still the same basic, I don't know, made of steel, and it's all the same color, material, finish as that part that we want, and is going to be also like drilled, and they will do some sheet metal bending, and they will do some anodizing, etc. But it's just, the hole is not exactly in the same place, and there's this and this and this kind of little changes. So you can get quotes from suppliers like this, but then at one point when you select the supplier, at least you need to give them the final part that you need, right? And sometimes the final part, especially the enclosure, kind of reveals what kind of product it is, right? If it's the full enclosure, sometimes it's a part of the enclosure, especially when the customer wants it in a material that is not typical for that product category, right? So if, I don't know, for some appliances that are often made, I don't know, let's say in plastic, maybe a part of it is going to be made of ceramic, for example, or some special metal alloy or something like that. Then suppliers, they see only maybe half of the enclosure, they have no idea, right? But sometimes there's no way to hide it. Okay, I see the enclosure, okay, like it's pretty obvious what it is. Okay, especially if you're going to emboss or deboss like your brand name on it, for example, it's going to be in the mold. Like some of the suppliers are going to see that, right?
Yeah.
Except if plastic production is done by your final assembler. Then if it's all in house, you only have to deal with the assembler, your contract manufacturer that does assembly and plastic production and maybe some other things. You have to deal with that one company, but the sub-suppliers don't see these kind of things, right? So you need to think of how to structure your supply chain that way. And in some cases, you have to you can show them the full product, but you tell them it has to be assembled together with another part. I'm not going to give you the full other part because confidentiality issues, but here is like a jig for you to assemble together with your product. It will assemble exactly that way. So it has to assemble exactly that way. If it doesn't like this, that's fine. But then that means, a little bit more engineering work to think of, okay, let's make a jig that mates with that part the same way, etc. It's extra work. In the end, it takes a little bit extra time and extra money. So
cool idea, though.
Yeah. No, it's how to say. It's not so common, but it's a smart way to do it, right? And then obviously when they deliver the products, well, if you work with a contract manufacturer, again, that's specialized in blenders. When the component supplier, they see who places the orders, there's that company, they can search, or just when they will deliver the products, okay, then it's a company specializes in blenders or in, I don't know, electric fans or something like that. Okay, then I know, right? I have an idea of what it is. You need to be aware of these kind of things. There's a lot of little tricks.
That's assuming that you're working with a supplier who is kind of quite aggressively looking for this kind of thing. And I suppose if we wind the clock back to your vetting process, and we've spoken about vetting before, vetting suppliers many times, right? In fact, we some time ago made a whole series of podcast episodes about vetting suppliers effectively, right? In theory, if you've vetted suppliers who, for which numerous reasons, are deemed to be trustworthy and suitable, hopefully there's less chance that they'll actually be doing that.
So again, you when you vet the suppliers, you vet them for, okay, are they capable of doing this? Do they have the experience? Do they kind of have the right fit, etc., etc.? But can you really feel like how hungry are they for business? If you avoid people who are hungry for business, then your project will move more slowly, right? They will not put a lot of efforts into the product, maybe. So usually you actually look for people who are interested, respond relatively fast, provide relatively good service, etc., etc. And usually it's people who are more hungry for business who do this kind of thing. So it's not very realistic to say, pick some companies that are not likely to be interested in more business, right?
No.
And you can't really, evaluate a company for like honesty. It's kind of difficult. Now, there are some red flags.
You might catch some red flags though. For example,
Yes.
if they offer you a product catalog and it's already got other people's products in it, maybe and they claim it's their own.
Yes, so that would be a red flag. Yeah, a bit too quick to talk about their maybe other customers' products and things like that. And also when you do the due diligence research, if you see that they've been involved in some lawsuits or non-compliance to contractual terms, etc., then you have to press on that. Like, what is that? Like, tell me more about that lawsuit. What was it about? Like, I'm kind of scared now, right?
Yeah.
And you can see these kind of things when you do proper due diligence, because these kind of things is actually out there, accessible, right? In databases. So there are some red flags, but most of the time you don't really see the red flags, right? And again, the risk usually comes when you start to move a bunch of products, and that might be 2 or 3 years down the road, right? Maybe they just lost a big customer and they're kind of desperate and they're ready to make some big moves, and who cares what happens, right? It's very difficult to prevent that through proper sourcing and vetting, unfortunately.
True. Good.
All right. And now, we should just quickly also mention, obviously, you need to sign a non-disclosure, non-use, non-circumvention agreement that is enforceable in a country where your supplier has assets, right? So
100%.
That's pretty basic. And then for product development, if you're going to be involved in product development involve a supplier, you need them to sign a product development agreement that clarifies who will own the intellectual property and all kinds of other things like that. So, that's also something that you should not skip. I think it has basic steps.
Yeah, we've written about that. So links to that and a lot more in the show notes. Okay, so in this episode, we've talked about why IP can get leaked when you're sourcing components. We've spoken about, the types of IP that people are going to go after, especially with regards to innovative products and custom parts, rather than something that's off the shelf, of course. You shared some strategies about, avoiding problems, leakage, getting copied. We spoke a bit about vetting suppliers as well. So I think that covers a lot of the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about when we are sourcing components with a view to protecting IP. Thanks, Renaud. Good one.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review, and share because it will really help others discover us too.